I know what you're going to say. What would you do if
the weather's bad?
Yeah, if the weather's bad.
This is what I do for all my photography, is just shoot it in black and white, put a vignette on it, call it art, mate.
Brilliant.
That's like half my career, basically. Welcome to the DCW podcast. I'm James Arteas, editor-in-chief of digitalcameraworld.com, and this is my colleague Mike. Introduce yourself, Mike. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Mike, and I'm the how-to editor for digitalcameraworld.com. And that basically means I'm kind of in charge of a lot of the tutorials from anything really, from landscapes to portraits to wildlife to motorsport.
So basically, if you want to know how to do something, Mike is the man.
Yeah, I am a jack of all trades and a master of...
Some. Most. The point is, Mike's a good bloke to have here, especially as we get into some nitty-gritty about technical things, creative things, and also one of the key topics of today, which we're going to jump right into. Obviously, this podcast is a lot about talking about gear, talking about hot trends and topics in the industry. And we kind of thought we'd start our own hot topic this week because recently posted on Digital Camera World, one of our colleagues, Callum, wrote a piece questioning, are prime lenses dead? So this is the point of In Focus, our first segment of the show today. So yeah, primes are dead. Maybe they're dead, maybe they're not. Let's discuss. Basically, so as our colleague Callum, he's a Fujifilm GFX user. And like many photographers, not all, but like many photographers, he built his trade. He's a commercial photographer as well as being a journalist. Has always used prime lenses for the reasons that lots of us use prime lenses because of, well, we'll come on to the whys and wherefores in a moment. But he found that the GFX, I want to say, yes, so he's using the GF 100-200mm lens. He's found that lens is so good as a zoom lens, he's actually not using his primes anymore. And I find that a really fascinating idea because we've had so many cutting edge lenses come out and they're real game changers. I've called them prime killers in the past. So we've got things like when the EOS R system first came out and one of the signature lenses was the Canon RF 28-70mm f2. It's a big tank of a lens. I have fond memories. Chris George and I went to the launch party in London. We're in a gigantic warehouse. It was dark and it was all like cyberpunk and Blade Runner ring. We had this gigantic lens, f2. It was a see in the dark lens, right? But it was so blimmin' big, it was kind of impractical. But now we've got Sony's got a version of that, 28-70 f2, much, much smaller. We've got lenses like the Sony 50-150mm f2. So we've got all these lenses now that ostensibly they can replace your collection of primes, right? These are like real workhorse lenses, wedding photographers, event photographers, just everyday, day-to-day walkabout shooters. So Mike, first of all, are primes dead or are they not dead? And do these super zooms or can these sort of all-in-one zooms really replace the qualities that we like from a prime lens? Maybe start by telling us why we would use a prime lens rather than a zoom.
Well, I guess firstly, no, they're not dead.
Spoiler!
Fujifilm X100VI puts pay to that. So that,
controversial.
It's a prime lens. Initially, you'd say that you'd use a prime lens because it was sharper and because it was faster. And as you say, that's kind of changed over the years. In many cases, zoom lenses, image-wise, have got so good. They're comparable to prime lenses and, if not better in some cases. Obviously, it depends, what you're comparing to.
Yeah, sure.
But speed is still the thing. I mean, Sigma's brought out the, I think it was the very first full frame f1.8 zoom lens, right?
Yeah, and recently we've had the 17-40 f1.8, which is an APS-C lens, but to that point, we're still getting these zoom lenses with a lot of speed.
Definitely. But there's, they're not readily available. By that I mean, if you're shooting Nikon or whatever, full frame Nikon, you can't access it. And it's a small zoom range. So if you're shooting something like wildlife, and you want to have a super telephoto and you want to shoot it like f4 or f2.8 or something like that, then you're still going to have to go down the road of primes.
Right.
But at the end of the day...
Now, Mike, let me just say, that's a very specific argument-winning example, right?
Yeah.
But if you were, for example, like a wedding professional or a weekend warrior, and maybe it's also a case of cost, right? So if you were shooting weddings, you might get like a 50, an 85 and a macro lens, right? To cover all things. You might have a 24mm to get wide shots and stuff. So if it's a case of buying a camera, just buying those 3 primes or whatever, versus buying a camera and just that one, maybe the 50 to 150, does that change the argument a little bit if you're looking for like a very, again, to your point, a very specific use case? Could that be the compromise, or would you, as someone who sort of works professionally and shoots a lot of stuff, would you be like, it's still not as good as using a dedicated prime?
No, totally. I kind of think of it like, this isn't always the case, but if you've got a zoom lens, maybe you're thinking more about the subject, as in that takes priority. You have got to capture that subject. So if you're at a wedding, you've every reason to use a zoom. Or, you might have 2 cameras on you or something where you can swap between primes. But at the end of the day, a zoom lens is like, sports photography, wedding photography, and even wildlife, maybe birds in flight or something, where you just don't have time to react. And the subject is, your main focus. Primes, I kind of feel, are a little bit artier. I don't want to say they're more creative, because you can be insanely creative with zoom lenses, but primes put you in a different mindset. And I have heard of...
this is the how-to editor in you speaking.
Well, I have heard, and I can't remember the YouTuber's name, so I apologize about that. But I did see a YouTube video a little while back where this chap was saying that he likes to take a zoom lens and use it like a prime. So
let's stop it at certain focal lengths.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think that's because of the mindset, because I rarely know what focal length I'm shooting at if I'm using a zoom. However, and I have thought about this, I reckon 85, maybe 90% of the time when you're using a zoom lens, you're either shooting wide open or you're shooting at the very telephoto end.
Right. One extreme or the other.
Yeah. But, one area, interestingly, where I think zooms are just fantastic is landscapes.
Expand. Tell me more.
Well, because the kind of term zoom with your feet doesn't really apply with landscapes.
Or with a mountain that's all the way over
exactly,
there. Yeah.
Exactly.
You have to zoom with your feet a very long way.
Precisely, yeah. You might have to trudge through a bog or, swim across a lake or something, and you just need a zoom lens.
Yeah. Going on safari, right? Same thing. The lion might be here, might be over there, might be a long way away. So you might need a zoom.
You could zoom with your feet.
Maybe not the best idea in the world.
Might be a bad idea.
But does it change, right? So again, to the arty-farty side of the argument, if I'm a proper photographer and I've got my 35mm lens or my 50mm or whatever, then I go out and I make sure I'm going out and finding those things. I'm not settling for what the world gives me, right? Then maybe there's a different philosophy here. I'm not reacting to the world. I'm making something of my scene. Is that just a nonsense? Is there some merit to that? Like there is more artistic merit, or there is better photographic results if you do go and make the world conform to your 50mm lens rather than settling for 81mm because you've got a zoom on?
Frequently, I've shown my family pictures and they've gone, "Why were you using a prime?"
Right.
And of course that never happened. No one cares once you've taken a photo. Okay. And I think maybe one area to kind of walk it back where primes work really well is if you're new to photography. Mm-hmm. You get a kit lens, and I think sometimes a kit lens just affords you too many possibilities and it confuses things.
Yeah.
So if you're a beginner, I would say go out, buy a 50mm, a nifty 50, it's going to be cheap. It doesn't even have to be, like I said, it doesn't have to be an expensive one. It can be a cheap Chinese one, which I'm sure we'll get onto.
Yep.
And learn your craft, learn to zoom with your feet, learn to shoot different angles. Once you're comfortable with that, then you can get a zoom lens. And I think you'll use, going back to that YouTube video I was talking about, if you work with primes initially, you'll then begin to work with a zoom almost like it's a prime. You won't stand there and go, "Oh, I'm just going to zoom in because I can't be bothered to zoom with my feet."
There's some infrastructure there of what your brain wants to see. It's
Definitely.
like, that's probably, you may not know in your head, that's about 85mm, but you'll know which prime you'd reach for.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said for that. I think there's something to be said for using the zoom mindfully. What did you start on? What did you learn with that example? Did you start with like a prime, a nifty 50 or something?
No, I started with a 24-70s. No, I'm joking. I did start with a nifty 50.
Right.
And that basically never left my camera for years. I did try other lenses. I borrow lenses, bits and bobs. But, even to this day, I feel most comfortable shooting with a 50mm prime. Or actually, I tend to shoot with a 40mm prime now.
Oh, you're one of those guys.
Yeah. I'd love to say it's because 40mm looks better, but it's because it was about £100 cheaper than the other option.
Well, there is some merit to what you're saying, because you just alluded to Chinese lenses, and I was asking before about like the cost benefit versus this and that. So we've got this new wave now of Chinese or made in Asia lenses. So you've got these third-party lens manufacturers. Historically, third-party lenses were kind of cheap and cheerful, maybe a bit nasty. They were like a second-tier choice, right? If you couldn't afford a proper Nikon lens or a proper Canon lens, you'd buy one, a bit like buying old Russian lenses in the old SLR days, right? But now we've got these lenses from like Lauer and Miike and all these people, and they're actually, not only are they really good, some of them, not all, some of them like outperform native first-party lenses. So if you can buy a really nice prime for like $75, $100, maybe it's better to build a collection of primes for the same price as a zoom. So you don't just have like 24mm and whatever. You've got a nice selection of proper primes. Don't know if that's good value for money or a better way to learn, but to me, it's like, that's an important thing to consider.
No, definitely something to consider. And actually, some of these lenses just look really nice. And because of the boom in retro cameras, for example, the Nikon ZFC and the Nikon ZF, both, amazing looking retro cameras. There are no,
retro looking lenses.
Retro looking lenses, or that, well, certainly not with an aperture ring. But you can go and you can buy lenses from other manufacturers, from third-party manufacturers, and you can get your nice prime, your retro-looking prime with an aperture ring. So yeah, and some of them do really funky things. I saw one the other day. I've got to think of the brand name now. It escapes me. We might have to flash it up.
Insert brand name here.
But it's something like the world's first prime with an interchangeable aperture. So I think it's got like a wheel, and it basically turn your aperture into like a heart or a star or whatever, And yeah, it's a gimmick, but it's so cheap that
you might have a go.
It's a bit of fun. Yeah.
So I think we know where you stand on this. I'll just say, as somebody who learned on primes, I didn't buy my first zoom lens for about 5 years after starting. I learned on a 90mm lens, so that kind of threw my photography way out of whack. Like, I don't know how to use any other lens. So all my street portraits and street photography is on a 90mm lens. But as somebody who's got like a workhorse 24-70 lens now, I see the merit in it. But again, I think because we've got that mental infrastructure of having learned on primes, as you said, I know how to use that lens more effectively than I might if I was just blindly zooming in and out. But quick verdict then, Mike, prime lenses, are they dead as Julius Caesar, or are they just as important as they ever were?
Absolutely not. Just as important as they ever were. If not, maybe slightly more important, because, you can pick them up for such a good price.
Well, whatever you think about primes, which we'd love to hear, please do let us know in the comments below, or send us a polite or grotty email, depending on whatever your preference is. Where we're going in our gear up section, we don't need primes because we're going to look at something very, very special. So in our gear up section, we're going to dive into our camera bag. And today, the toy that we've been using the last couple of weeks, Mike,
is the Nikon P1100.
Mike, this camera, it's either going to lose us all the credibility or whatever little credibility we had, or it's going to, a bit more, go on. That's it, a bit more. Attaboy. So this camera is going to ruffle some feathers by virtue of what it is. We both adore it, not because it's a 100 megapixel medium format camera, not because it shoots 120 frames a second with a global shutter, not because it's got a 10 million ISO. We like it because of its one major party trick, which is...
It's insane, quite frankly, insane focal length. And that's an optical focal length. If you count the digital focal length,
it's even more ridiculous.
It is stupid. So yeah, it's 3,000 millimeters equivalent.
And not just the long end. So this is a zoom range from 24 to 3,000.
And I never think of that. I never even consider that it can go that wide. So.
And that's the thing, right? Because it takes it from being, we were just talking about zoom lenses, and maybe we were, zoom lenses in and of themselves in terms of will they replace primes, whatever. But as an all-in-one piece of kit that goes from 24mm all the way to 3000. First of all, there's no other lens, no super zoom, no nothing that you can put on a regular mirrorless camera or DSLR that matches that, right?
No.
It just doesn't exist. But if you wanted a camera, it can't quite shoot everything, right? But if you wanted one camera that shoots pretty much whatever you might want to shoot on holiday, for example.
Yeah.
Will that do the job?
Yeah, it will. It will. And yes, it is big. It is really chunky. But if you think about, even putting on a 200 mil zoom lens onto your kind of average mirrorless camera, it's really not that big. And actually, it's only, I think it's just under 1.5 kilograms, which is about 3 pounds.
Oh, get you with your specs.
Yeah.
Don't look at me, mate. I don't know. It's just heavy. That's all I know.
Yeah, I'm just worried now that 3 pounds isn't the equivalent.
That's American, mate. Don't speak.
Yeah. But no, it is. It is just under 1.5 kilograms, which is
which is a lot.
For what it is.
For what it is, exactly. So I did some. First of all, let's talk about a bit of specs, right? Just so we're not completely mad being excited about a bridge camera. So for a bit of context, bridge cameras, well, they look like that. For those listening, not via the magic of internet, right? It looks like a DSLR with a big lens on the front. It's all built in. You can't change the lens. The idea being it bridges, it's in the name, sort of manual control with lots of power in a digital camera or DSLR with the versatility of a super zoom lens. So it's not a category of camera that a lot of people have a lot of time. People turn their nose up at this kind of camera, right? But the fact that you can shoot brilliant pictures of the moon. You can go on holiday and take a picture of that church tower that's miles away. The first time I saw that, right, was the P1100, the model before that, which is actually quite similar, just got a different name. We went to, it was a previous photo keynote. I was there with our lab manager, Ben Andrews, and we were just at a cafe. Poor old Ben, he'd lugged this thing around through like hand luggage and everything. We sat at this cafe in Germany, right? And Ben was sat there and Ben's holding this brick of a thing. And he goes, "Hey, look at the moon." And I went, and he goes, no, with this. And he got that out and zoomed in, and it's a frame-filling picture of the moon. None of that Samsung nonsense where it's AIing the moon, right? An actual full and a decent quality.
Yeah.
So that's just a sort of thing. People like taking pictures of the moon, but that's just an example of the sort of thing this can do. As I mentioned before, I've been on Safari before. I would have loved to have that camera on Safari, because what happened on Safari was I took two bodies, one with a 24-70, one with a 70-200. Which is nothing matching that, right? And you're mixing them out, you're trying to find the right one, you're trying to put a teleconverter on to get a little bit more reach. If I had that, okay, the quality wouldn't be as good, but I'd have the pictures I couldn't get. And I'm probably not going to blow them up and have an exhibition, but I did put them on Instagram. So pros might turn their nose up at that, but for me and thee and most folks, that camera would do the job, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And when I used the P1000 for the first time, the first thing I did was zoom into the moon.
Right.
And I'm not I'm not a huge astrophotographer. And that was the first time I'd seen the moon like myself that close.
Yeah.
And it was quite something. You can see the craters.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool. And the fact that, this is, like a 700 pound camera, basically.
Well,
749, is it? Something like that?
It is. Let's put this in some context, right? So I did a bit of mental maths. I went on the internet yesterday, right, and I looked up some stuff. So we got this camera. Bit of specs. Okay, it's a 16 megapixel sensor.
Yeah.
It's a 1/2.3 inch sensor. So it's small. Nobody really understands what 1/2.3 inch is. It's one of those weird fraction sensors that makes no sense other than to scientists. But it's small. Smaller than Micro Four Thirds, smaller than APS-C. So it's a small sensor, which means it's got a low ISO ceiling, right? ISO 6400 or something. So you're not going to get amazing detail. You're not going to get amazing low light. But it does some cool stuff. 24 to 3000 millimeter zoom lens. It shoots 4K 30. It's got a 7 FPS burst, which is pretty good. 4-stop shake reduction.
Yep.
When you're shooting at 3000 mil, you need that. And it's got decent but not amazing autofocus. Anyway, let's just take a look at the lens itself, right? So 3000 mil top end. If you were looking for an equivalent zoom lens or just, a tele lens, Canon RF. I can't do all the systems. Sorry to all the Nikon and Sony folks, right? If you wanted this for your Canon RF system, you can get a 24 to 240 for £900 or $900. If you want a 100 to 400, which again is nothing matching that, you're talking $650. A 100 to 500 mil lens, you're talking $2,800. The longest zoom lens that Canon does for the RF system is 200 to 800. That's $2,000 in the UK, $2,000 in the US. But the longest focal length, the longest reach you can get on RF is with an 800mm f5.6 lens, which is £17,000 or dollars. And you put a 2x converter on that, which costs about £700. So basically, you still only get 1800mm of reach, and it's costing you 18 grand.
Wow.
The P1100 it's a little bit more expensive than you thought. It's £1,000 in the UK, 1,000 in the US.
Okay.
But still, you look at it, you cannot possibly match the reach of that camera with any conventional system.
Yeah.
And that's really its selling point. It's not about pixel peeping. It's not about, the ISO does this. Blah, blah, blah. It's about what you can shoot with that you can't shoot with a regular camera. And for me, that's a really good party trick.
Yeah, 100%. The sensor as well, although it's sort of downfall with the image quality and whatnot, I mean, that's integral to getting that, equivalent focal length.
That's what makes the zoom possible, right?
Exactly. So it's it's a shortcoming that, it basically has to have. And like you said, if you're shooting for Instagram or just for fun, I think, even if you're somebody like a bird watcher and you don't really have that much interest in photography, I still think this is really cool. Yeah. I think you could take this out to a lake and, bird watch with it, basically. And incidentally as well, they do a dot sight.
The old dot sight, yes.
Yes. And I've actually had a play with that, which pops into the hot shoe. And it basically makes the camera look a little bit like Call of Duty. Where you kind of have like a red dot sight. But what it means is that because of the, stupid focal length, when you're maxed out, I mean, you just move even slightly and you
lose everything in the frame.
You're never going to find your subject again. So what the dot sight does is basically you can kind of look through the dot sight, line it up on your subject, and then you have to calibrate it. And then when you look through the viewfinder, you'll have the subject perfectly framed.
I think, to your point, I think it's great. As a birding lens specifically, birds in flight, it's going to struggle because the AF isn't competent enough to capture birds in flight reliably. But for, birds drinking, sitting on branches and stuff, ideal, perfect, right? Yeah. And for wildlife in specific, I think there's a myth that for wildlife cameras, you need amazing autofocus. But actually, again, some have been on safari. Animals in the wild are really lazy. They're always still, right? They don't tend to run around constantly chasing each other and killing each other. They just sort of sleep and hang out. So you don't need that great AF for sitting subjects. I mean, I live near, I think it's the world's first drive-through safari park down the road. It's Longleat. And taking that to Longleat, best thing ever. Like, I would never go back to Longleat with any other camera, right? That is just ideal. The gorillas are miles away across the water, no problem. Yeah. Red pandas are up here right in your face, no problem. The one thing I would say about that camera is anything that isn't its crazy super zoom, so if you're using a 24 or, 50 or 85, probably your phone is better in terms of pure quality. Yeah, definitely. I think it's also worth mentioning that, we did touch on this, but the differences are so few between the P1000 and the 1100. Basically, reading between the lines, it was brought out to comply to new EU regulations, basically to put a USB-C port in the camera. But there's a couple of little refinements. I think there's some new scene modes. I think one of them's like a fireworks mode. Yep. And the other thing is, and I've not tested this, but it does have some, I think you can select the size of the AF kind of box. Right, yeah. For birds, basically. So it, you have slightly more options in terms of AF. Yeah. Other than that, they're basically the same. I actually think the new one is like very slightly lighter. I don't know why, but it is. We're seeing this a lot with a lot of manufacturers where the sort of like the Mark II or the Mark III is kind of very similar to the previous version. Just again, things like USB-C ports or having little bit better IBIS, shake reduction, that sort of thing. But when the old one isn't on the shelves anymore, you've got to buy the new one anyway. So I don't see that as any problem necessarily. And I've been thinking as well, because this is kind of like a, world's longest, basically, for a consumer camera.
It's quite unusual to have something so unique, so, optically cool, and actually be in a price range that, it's not cheap, but it's in a price range that's kind of affordable.
Well, it's not 18 grand, is it, for a lens that's the same thing?
Exactly.
And I've even seen on a YouTube channel where they put it up against the Sony with like an 800mm lens or something, like a proper 20 grand lens, and the image quality is actually comparable on the P1100.
Really?
Yeah. Because I think diffraction and heat rising and stuff at a certain point is false economy. But I think we both know where we stand on this, Mike. Final thoughts. Is the P1100 a bridge too far?
Oh.
Sorry, I can't help myself. I'm of a certain age.
It is for most people, but if you are that, that photographer that wants that insane reach, then it's ideal, and you won't find anything like it. And that's the whole point of this camera. And, kudos to Nikon for bringing something like this out, because I really think the industry needs it. So I was really happy when the P1100 came out.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of wrap this up, we're always grateful, and my colleague Chris was on the show as well, sort of saying things like, kudos to Canon for bringing back compact cameras. And I say kudos to Fuji for bringing out crazy things like the X-Half. Brands should not forget that these other kinds of cameras exist and have existed, and people kind of still do want them. So even though bridge cameras might not be trendy, people might turn their nose up at them. Actually, they're actually pretty cool. They do cool things. And if you're the sort of person who's like, I won't bother taking my camera, I'll just take my phone, just take that. That's my advice. Not a bridge too far, bridge in the right direction as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly.
Okay, we've rattled on about image quality. We've rattled on about how to get the best from your kit, whether you're using primes or zooms. So, Mike, this is my my smooth and slightly clumsy segue into this week's troubleshooting section.
It's my favourite bit.
So what you're here for, mate, you got to get me out of a hole. So here's a situation. Again, asked about this a lot because everyone finds themselves in this situation sooner or later. You don't even have to be a photographer, to be honest. You want to go to a nice location, right? It's like, oh, there's a nice mountain down the road. I'd like to go and visit that mountain. Or I'd like to go and take a photo of that mountain. So I'm gonna put it in my diary. I'm gonna head out, go and see this mountain next weekend. The night before, you charge your camera up and you clear your memory cards. You put petrol in the car. And you think, oh, this is great. I'm really excited. Go to bed nice and early. Get up early in the morning so you get the golden hour and all of that. Get in the car, you arrive, and the weather's just awful. It's diabolical. Whether it's actively bad weather, like it's raining and cloudy, or it's just like not even decent enough to be bad weather, it's just meh. You get to your location, and it doesn't look like what you want it to look like. What do you do when you want to go and take a landscape photo, Mike, and the landscape is not playing ball? Can you do anything? Do you just get in the car and go home? What are our options here?
Well, I think firstly, if I had the attitude of, if the weather's bad, I'm not going to go on my landscape shoot, I would have, I would have never done anywhere near as many tutorials, We're
in the wrong country for that attitude, aren't
we? Exactly. And, when you're shooting a tutorial or something, or even if you're a pro, if you're doing something specific, you just have to roll with it. And there's actually very few weather conditions where you just need to go home and absolutely give up. So firstly is just non-stop torrential rain. Mm-hmm. And even in that case, you don't really know if it's going to stop or not. And here's the thing. When you get inclement weather with landscapes, quite often the coolest sunsets, the best cloud arrangements, the nicest conditions to shoot are when the weather is a bit crap.
Right.
So really, you want to sit it out. Obviously, don't do anything dangerous. If you're up mountain peaks or something like that, then you have to be sensible. You really have to keep an eye on the weather. But generally, you can kind of turn any kind of weather situation with landscapes to your advantage. And I know I've gone on a landscape shoot fairly recently, actually, where I woke up in the morning and drove out to a lighthouse and was photographing this lighthouse, bit overcast, blah, 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 moved inland and it was snowing.
Oh, right.
Yeah. This was.
I wasn't expecting that to come after what you just said. Right.
Exactly. It was completely snowing. It was completely covered. I was in the mountains at Snowdonia in Wales. I think is it Erie National Park now? I think it gets called.
It's Erie. I don't know, mate.
I don't know. But anyway, that's that's where I was.
You went there, don't ask me. What did the sat nav say? Did it have a voice? Oh, was Stephen Fry telling me where I'm going on my landscape shoot?
We got lost. I can't imagine we were using a sat nav.
It doesn't even matter if you go to the landscape you wanted to. Just take a picture of whatever you arrive at.
Exactly. And we just made it work. What I will say though is if you are, you can't go on a landscape shoot with a very specific kind of style in mind if the weather's not what you're expecting. So I know what you're going to say. What would you do if
the weather's bad?
Yeah, if the weather's bad.
This is what I do for all my photography, is just shoot it in black and white, put a vignette on it, call it art, mate.
Brilliant.
That's like half my career, basically, which may or may not be a choice. But yeah, I mean, I've been on landscape. I'm not a landscape expert by any means, and I find it exceptionally difficult if the weather isn't exactly what I want it to be. And it never is, because we live in England. I mean, if we lived somewhere, like California, it's pretty consistent, right? You probably know what you're going to get when you get there. But being here, what sort of stuff, what should you bring sort of as best practice? What should you bring precautionarily? I'm assuming you might need a filter or something to sort of get by those days when stuff is not playing on your side, or tripod or stuff. What should be in your kit bag if you go and shoot landscapes? And what are sort of like, I was going to say rainy day items, or what things should you bring just in case?
Rain cover. It doesn't matter what photography you do. If you're doing it outside, you need to bring a rain cover. And it doesn't matter if your camera's weather sealed either. You still need a rain cover. Because weather sealings, any camera can reach a point where it can get waterlogged. Yeah, definitely. So bring a rain cover. You're probably going to have a tripod with you anyway. Filters are great. I love using filters. And apart from a polarizing filter, you don't actually need ND filters and ND grads really nowadays.
Blasphemy.
Because, you can, the high dynamic range on cameras is incredible now. You can exposure brackets. You can, as long as you're shooting raw, pull things out in post. But I still like to see what's happening in camera, so I'm still an advocate of filters. But what you really need to think about is the style that you're going to shoot. So if it's overcast, then you might go for a more minimalist aesthetic. Mm-hmm. So you could shoot black and white, or you could just roll with the fact that the conditions are kind of making everything look really drab. You could kind of drop the saturation a little bit, try to get as low contrast as possible with minimalism. You kind of want the horizon line. If you're shooting, say, like the seaside or something, you're shooting a seascape, you'll want that horizon line of the sea to the sky almost to be invisible, to kind of like blend in. You can go for, if it's harsh sunlight, which actually I think is the hardest weather to shoot in.
Right.
A lot of people that don't do photography as an enthusiast, they go, oh, it's a lovely
nice sunny day. Yeah.
Why don't you head out? And actually that's very difficult. Sunsets with very clear skies are kind of boring. Usually, you have to have the caveat. Usually, any photographer can do something crazy and creative, and it'll look amazing. But generally, that's the case. You kind of want some clouds. Clouds are great because the light reflects off of the clouds, bounces around.
It's like a big softbox in the sky.
Exactly, it is. Precisely.
Look at me. I am an expert in landscape photography. But it sounds almost like you're saying that actually inclement weather can actually help make your shot.
Yeah.
If you go on like a clear, pretty day, conventionally pretty day, it's probably a lot less interesting than if you've got some dramatic clouds and a bit of texture to your image.
Yes. Rainfall is great because in between showers, that's usually when clouds look their best. That's usually when the light starts peeping through. It looks its most dramatic. Also, when you have water on the landscape, it kind of increases the saturation. It gives more punch to the colors. But I went on a shoot about a year ago with a landscape photographer. He's called Neil Burnell. Check him out. He's incredible. One of my favorite landscape photographers. he does a lot of minimalist photography. But what he does as well is he has an infrared converted camera. And the reason he has an infrared converted camera is because he basically got bored of getting up really early on a day off, going and shooting the sunrise, and then twiddling his thumbs during the day, waiting for sunset, golden hour and sunset. So that's a great, really interesting, really creative form of photography for those kind of June, July, summery times where the sun is, beating down on you. There's lots of high contrast. It's kind of another, like you said, with black and white, it's another way to do things.
Yeah.
So you've always got options, always.
Out of interest, because we've been talking about primes and zooms and stuff, what are you typically shooting with? If you got a landscape kit, do you have like a set lens or a set focal length that you tend to go for? Or is it a bit more reactionary? Are you one of those folks who shoots with a telephoto lens shooting landscapes? What's your sort of go-to kit?
I think when you first start shooting landscapes, and I used to do this, I'd basically just get the widest lens I could find and make everything really wide.
Yeah.
And you soon learn that actually you just end up with a disproportionate amount of sky to land, unless you've got the right subject. So I tend to go a little bit tighter, probably sort of 24 mil and tighter, maybe even 35 or 50 at times. But a great lens, actually, going back to what we were talking about earlier, I think zoom lenses for landscapes are great. You can get some really nice lenses like 24 to 200, for example. That just gives you everything you need all day long. And because you're shooting landscapes and you're going to be using, say, f8, f11, they're quite cheap because you can get an f4 or, even narrower lens and be quite happy with it. So if you're only going to take one lens with you for landscapes, I would get something like that. But failing that, you can just use a kit lens.
I think this is one of the areas where, obviously we all like toys, nice expensive kits, get the nicest lens you can, get an L lens or an S lens if you're using Canon or Nikon. But really, like you say, you're shooting at, the kind of apertures that, your kit lens is probably going to do you all right. Certainly while you're learning, certainly while you work out what you're doing.
Definitely. If you've got a decent lens, just one lens, spend money on a really good tripod. Honestly, nothing is more frustrating than a rubbish tripod. So, and when... Spoken
like somebody might have had such an experience in the field.
I have, yes. Squeaky ball heads,
Didn't you have a tripod fall over with an expensive camera on it?
Yes, yeah. But that was because of stupidity, not because of the tripod.
Right.
That's because it was I think we were in Malta, me and a friend of mine, Amy, and we had her Sony, I can't remember what it was. It was one of the Alpha series cameras.
Not a cheap camera.
With, I think, a G Master lens on it.
Not a cheap lens.
We were by the coast. It was blowing a hoolie. And we were just miles away from the camera. And we both saw it tip. And, Usain Bolt couldn't have got there quick enough. It smashed the lens.
I laugh because it's not my camera. I don't mean it.
It smashed the lens into the mount.
Oh.
So, it was... but it wasn't my camera, so it does.
So you can laugh as well. You mentioned shooting RAW, which lots of people insist you should shoot RAW for everything anyway. And maybe shooting bracketed exposures and things. What is your take on? So we've said you can go out, you can make something of the day, even if the conditions are really, really bad. What do you think of the folks who would argue either to rescue your shot or just to do it because you want to, this phenomenon of like sky replacement, using AI essentially? Because it's incredibly easy these days to just do a couple of clicks in Photoshop or in Luminar or any of these apps and just change the sky. So make the sky whatever you want it to be. As a landscape photographer, does that tread on anything for you ethics-wise? Does that make you feel like, no, that's not real photography? Or actually, we're talking about actually improving the results you can get? What's your take on that?
It's difficult because if you replace your skies and you're happy with it and you're happy with the photos that you're getting, then, you do you, quite frankly. Personally, I kind of look at it as landscapes are natural. It's about photographing the natural world. And I wouldn't want to replace the skies in my landscapes for that reason. And landscapes is all about light. So, landscape photographers take much effort to go to a location with, and capture a scene in beautiful light. And also going back to the same scene and photographing it in different light.
Right, yeah.
And I think if you start getting into sky replacement, you're kind of almost ruining part of the joy of landscape photography, for me anyway. I feel like sky replacement is useful for, say, real estate photography, where, it's a horrible day, they're shooting the front of the house and they want to replace the sky. Wedding photographers,
yes,
those kind of instances, or people who do kind of surreal composites or, very composite heavy imagery, and that's their deal. That's what they do. But I think if you want to be the best landscape photographer that you can be, actually stopping replacing your skies and doing it the old-fashioned way, I actually think it'll make you a better photographer. And I think in the long run you'll feel better about your images.
Couldn't have said it better myself. AI can be helpful. These tools can be helpful.
Yes,
but they're kind of something to complement the craft of photography rather than replace shortcomings, I guess.
Definitely. And actually, one thing I guess I would say, and I know astrophotographers will do this quite a bit, where they will take a shot of the foreground and then they'll take a shot of the background and they'll kind of blend it, but it's done on the same shoot on the on the same day. I kind of feel like that's different somehow.
Right.
That
it's part of that process, right? You're there on the day,
Yes.
you're doing it mindfully with these steps in place.
Yeah.
So it's different than kind of after the fact going, blimmin' heck, I need to fix that. I didn't think about that on the day. Bit of a different conversation, I think, isn't it, that?
Yeah. And also be transparent.
Yeah.
We may get into this in future episodes, but, with the rise of AI, photographers are going to have to be more transparent about their photographs, because that transparency is going to be what will separate us from AI-generated images.
From the machines.
Exactly.
Mike, thank you for troubleshooting. A better solution than my solution, which is to shoot black and white.
No, shooting black and white is fine, by the way. It's a perfectly great solution.
Thank you for legitimizing my photography practice as well. If you've got any troubleshooting problems, things you want to know about your camera, shoots you've been on, you can't work out why they went wrong, just want some fun war stories from Mike about breaking expensive kit that doesn't belong to him, please do get in touch with us. The details are in the description below. That's it for this week's episode. Mike, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody for listening/watching, whether you're listening to us as a podcast or watching us on YouTube. Please do give us a like, a follow, ring the bell, subscribe, all that good stuff. And then you can F8 and be there in time for our next episode. Thanks for joining us.